Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking to Scott McCallister. Is that right?
Correct.
Architecture student in what year of architecture school?
I just finished my first semester of my third year, so I've got 2.5 years for a 5-year program left.
We're right in the middle of it.
Yep.
All right. How old are you?
I am 33.
33. So you're a responsible grown-up who's now going through college with a bunch of irresponsible little kids. Just kidding. Don't take it too seriously.
Oh, if I was anywhere near the top of my class, I would argue, or I would agree with you, but the younger students in my class
Kids
are
today,
mind-blowingly talented.
There's something, like every generation likes to look back and say, you guys are just messing it up. But there's something to do with kids today having so much access to information and experience in turn that there's certainly some positives to it that I don't think like Gen Xers like myself to a large degree. I think they kind of lack passing that respect down. They just always want to rely on like, you're messing it up. You're not doing what we would have done. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned both from older and younger generations. I think it's a really cool thing. But that aside, you're a Star Wars guy. Look
I'm
at that.
Bit of a Star Wars guy.
That's cool.
I've got BB-8 on my ankle.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm a Star Wars fan.
Nice. Okay, so you had just reached out via email with basically some questions and stuff, and I had said, hey, let's just not answer these now. Let's do a podcast, and that'll be helpful for people who might have the same questions. So I'm just going to kind of let you take over, and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today, your host is Scott McCallister.
My guest today is Trent Bell.
Where are you from originally, all that? Give us a little bit of your background and whatnot.
Well, originally I'm from Maine. I born and raised in southern Maine. I lived in Windham until I started to travel a little bit. I got into AmeriCorps and CCC and started giving back to my community.
What's CCC?
It's National Civilian Community Corps. So it's an offshoot of the old CCC service programs, and I worked with other adults and we traveled all around the United States or the southern United States, and that eventually led me into getting into trades and installing glass, and now into architecture school. I go to UMA. And like we said, right in the middle of that program, and just starting to look at what a career is going to be. And
right.
I've been taking some photography classes, and I'm, massively interested in architecture, and I like photography, and now's the time to see if it's more to it for me. Yep.
Okay. So are you interested in pursuing a living as an architect, or potential, and like combining your ability to photograph your own work potentially, or looking at a living as an architectural photographer?
I am right on the middle line of unsure.
That's a good place to be.
I want to explore practicing architecture. I put all this time into it, and I feel like no matter how much time I put into it, it will only help becoming a photographer if that's my goal.
Oh, absolutely.
I think I'm leaning more towards becoming a photographer.
Any reason why?
The architecture job industry is toxic to me.
In what way?
The constant demand for output, and I know that things are changing in that job market. That work to life ratio is becoming a much more common need for people, and I want to see.
It's always been a common need. It's just
more common talked about now.
Right. Like, so I was just talking to a friend about this the other day. There's a weird thing in there where I look at the current generation and how they're living, and there's something that like I chose to be very far outside the box when I was that age, to choose to live that way. And there's a lot of shame and guilt in a way that went with that, but I went with it enough and hard enough to where I figured out how to turn it into a profitable living for myself. Now the thing is, I look and I see all these people like living out of their cars and traveling, and I'm kind of like, who's doing all the work? Not everyone can do this, but who's to say they can't, So it's interesting, but to what you're saying, that work-life balance, if if it's not in balance, you're going to burn out
Absolutely.
so quickly, and you're going to hate what you do, and you're not going to be good at it.
Yeah.
And so that's a really hard thing, especially with inflation on the rise, housing being so expensive. How do you figure out and balance all that for the current generation? I feel like I kind of like jumped ahead and secured like, I've got mine, haha, you know, and now I look back and I'm like, geez, how are you guys going to make it? Like, you're going to have to move way inland to afford anything and blah, 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 blah. But work-life balance, very good thing to be thinking of ahead of time, in my opinion. So,
and that's probably the biggest thing about practicing architecture that makes me cautious is that work-life balance, and time with my wife and family is important to me. Sure. So I need to find the perfect fit, and I'm sure that fit is out there.
And you're in your early 30s right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Early to mid.
Early to mid.
I'll say early as long as I can.
We all do that. Okay, so you're leaning towards architectural photography as potentially a better way of doing it. Downside for you here, or raining on your parade, starting out as an architectural photographer, the difficulty of running into that. Just to, if you can know what's ahead of you, you'll be able to prepare for it, and it'll be easier to overcome. Okay, so I got my master's in architecture. I practiced for 3 years. Part of the difficulty of why I left architecture and became an architectural photographer wasn't at first necessarily that like I had to photograph anything, as much as I really enjoyed design. I really enjoyed thinking aesthetically. And I enjoyed a creative process, but I wanted a creative process that had a quicker cycle to it. The difficulty with architecture is that the creative cycle was like small and front-loaded for kind of schematic design and all that. And then the rest of it felt, for me, far more tedious as far as really technical details, understanding codes. It became far more conscientious and conservative in saying we have to build according to codes that are, I don't understand why the codes are there sometimes and can't really play with them. And so all that for me was very kind of oppressive to my personality and the enjoyment of it. Now, I didn't know you could be like an architectural designer and just do the fun part, but those jobs are so few and far between that it's kind of pointless. But to go from that, like if I could work as an architect only doing one project at a time on my own, I could maybe find a rhythm in there that could work for me. If you look at like Eric Reinhold, if you know him, he's really famous on YouTube. He's Mid-Coast. He might be someone who you'd want to reach out to if you don't know of him. He might be happy to sit down with you, might not, who knows. But he's very much my same personality when it comes to having to work under and not get credit for and stay within an organization and allow for someone else to see your value to then let you move ahead. I did not like that relationship. I didn't want to have to be under pleasing someone else to get me ahead in a controlling sense. I wanted to, if I did work for a client and it was amazing, the natural outpouring of that was for the word to spread and get more of that work rather than, well, I go one rung up in the ladder. To me that just wasn't as appealing. He's a great person to talk to about finding some good work-life balance working as a designer, and he's got tons and tons of videos online for that. Okay. So I would highly recommend that. Eric Reinhold, R-E-I, spelled like German, Reinhold. Okay. And he's all over YouTube if you search him and stuff. So a good source. So.
Sure, absolutely.
So work-life balance.
Yep. So I guess I would say that's a good lead into what do you think is the biggest difference going from a hobbyist photographer to a professional photographer?
So here's an interesting thing. I was never really a hobbyist photographer because of the darkroom aspect of it. I just didn't enjoy the idea of locking myself in a dark room and playing with temperamental chemicals, and it just wasn't appealing to me. But when digital came out and it was a far more immediate connection of attempt and judgment of that attempt and failure or success, that creative cycle, that turnaround was kind of like a turbocharger for me mentally, emotionally. It was like, wow, I can really play with this and improve very quickly and learn how to do this in a really good way. And I had kind of trained myself in architecture school to use Photoshop to be able to put my presentations together. So when I started playing around with digital, I had all this. Basically, I was making data for myself to then manipulate.
Yep.
And so I kind of used that to establish kind of a look and feel in post-production that I could get a nice look and feel. But the technical aspect of that look and feel and the execution of it was not that great for someone who could get to a place to charge enough money to do what I do. And that's when I realized I need to engage with someone who that part of that process had more of a talent and desire to work within that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started looking for someone like Tim to pull that part of it in. Tim's a little camera shy, but he's very important to this process. I think especially if you're working as a professional, it's especially with how digital is, if you want to be profitable to an extended amount, you have to start to pull that process apart, the shooting and the post-production. Because if I go out and I shoot, and that's what I can charge a lot for, but then I'm stuck doing post-production, not able to go out and do this big charge anymore, but this kind of what I have to pass on billing to the client in a smaller amount. If I can establish this and then find someone who's really talented at that kind of supercharges your business model.
That makes sense.
And so you can do that as taking the risk and do all the work to establish yourself and then provide a job for someone else to be able to do that in the way that I have. That's worked best for me because then you're not as much working with a business partnership that has a lot of pitfalls to it. I did that first and it didn't work out well. I did that several times and it didn't work out well. Now I've worked with Tim for now like a decade maybe, I don't know, a long time. But I took my wife's advice and said pay them so they know they're very appreciated and they have their own autonomy as far as schedule and everything else. Give them that work-life balance and freedom. And what you're essentially aiming at is kind of like golden handcuffs. It's like, I want to treat you so well and give you everything you need to where I don't lose you because you're that valuable to this whole process. So I forgot why I even started ranting at this point. But
well, I commend that. It's important to recognize your employees and what they really bring to your table and what it would really cost to make any changes in that, and then to show them that they're appreciative. And that's one of the issues with like the same thing you were talking about is working under people. I struggle with that because appreciation seems far and few between, but criticism is always at hand.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, no, that's nice to know. What do you think is unique about photographing architecture apart from other subjects?
Okay, so the first time I tried to shoot a piece of architecture, like intentionally, like I'm going to focus on getting a full set of photos of this building, right? It was the courthouse here in Biddeford. I had been on a Marvin window strip with the guy who was one of the lead designers on the project. And he was like, oh, you want to get into architectural photography? I'll see if I can get you into that courthouse on a Sunday when no one's there and you can just have the run of the place, blah, blah, blah. So I get there, I start shooting, and I could understand how to relate to the exterior of a space because I was thinking of it in the way that you'd photograph a human or anything else that had an exterior that you were representing. When you're shooting an interior, you're on the inside of something and the subject is wrapping around you rather than contained in front of you.
Yeah.
And so there was that. I didn't even quite understand, like, that's why it's difficult. I just understood I can't feel where I should be taking this photo from. I couldn't articulate it either, and I couldn't feel it because I hadn't done it enough.
Yeah.
So I had to keep trying and keep trying. About halfway through the day, I was just like, no one's depending on me. I'm out of here. This sucks. But there was I could still look at the exterior of a building, and I knew, like, this building looks best right here. I got to figure out how to shoot interiors. And I think I eventually got to the place where I found a house that was being built on the coast, and I approached the builder and said, hey, would you mind getting me access to this, and then I'll give you the photos. They didn't know who I was or anything else, but for a builder who has a lower aesthetic threshold, they're kind of like, great, we get this for free. They're not as concerned with marketing because their marketing is usually a little more so business to business and reputation rather than having to take out marketing and putting pretty pictures up.
Yeah.
It's a little different. So they're, naturally their threshold's different. And so I knew if I offered it for free that they'd probably be more likely to accept that. And so they did. I got in and I got a really good image of the exterior. And then when I got inside, I just did the best I could. And it turned out pretty well. If you look back at the photos now, there's a ton of stuff I did wrong, even on the exterior. But overall, it was pretty captivating. And that one project ended up on the cover of, I think, Maine Home Design. And a lot of it was serendipitous because right after I delivered the images to Shoreline Builders, that very day, I think it was Steve Kelly, a marketing person from Maine Home Design, stopped by and said, hey, you guys should advertise in our publication. And they were like, yeah, maybe you should check out this photographer that just dropped off. And from there, like, Maine Home Design started using me. Every chance I got to shoot anything for them, I just would swing for the fence. Because the opportunity to get in when you have zero reputation is the real, that's the ball that's hard to push up that hill when you're starting out. Because you're nobody with no reputation, no ability, no one's saying you should hire this guy. So you can go and you can get a job for someone else if you have the education, if it's in the, area where you're looking for. The problem with going into photography is, like, not many people hire photographers except directly. So then you're out there like, well, how do I prove that I can directly do this for you? You have to start out with really low cost. So you're a low risk because you are a risk because you're not proven. And you have to find all these opportunities to put yourself in front of something that you can make look good to then put in your portfolio, and then take that portfolio and go show people and hope that they hire you and blah, blah, blah. So if you're thinking about going into that, it's very important to have a good amount of savings, a low amount of debt, and a low amount of other responsibilities in your life at that time. So if you got a wife and kids, they need to be put on notice for at least 5 years that daddy's going to be working a little bit more and not bringing that much money home. It's not a great picture to paint, but on the other side of that, like, establishing that is a really good living. So it's one of those things where it's like a long shot, like you're trying to throw a football through a small hole in the top of that wall over there, that if you can hit it, you get the jackpot, but it's just so hard. Yeah. So that's a weird thing. But if you can kind of understand all the things that are pinned, but then the things that are movable and what you can afford to move in there and work it to your advantage, and anything that you can create that is advantage for yourself and an advantage for your potential client and potentially a third party, then you get more and more momentum behind choosing you to be the person to do that. Yeah. So you kind of have to find those advantageous moments for both you, a client, and even someone else, right? Yeah. So, and the other key is that architects are going to be your hardest client to get first, because they're going to look, can you do the work? Have other people decided that you can do the work, as in publications? And then below that, next would probably be magazines. You're going to have to show that you can do the work for a magazine, but they're not really going to care too much if other people have determined that you're good, because the magazine in itself has the discretion to look at your work and say, this is good. And whether you have a reputation or not to the magazine doesn't matter in the least. So if it's a good photo, it's a good photo, period. But for an architect, if it's a good photo, check one. Second, has this guy been published anywhere? Because if we spend all this money or any money to get these photos taken, can the photographer help us get it published somewhere so it'll be seen? There's a huge value that you bring with you. So establishing relationships with any publication is valuable. Below a publication, the next thing is probably builders, and even below that is going to be like real estate agents, because they're not looking to sell the images really, and they're looking for information. They're not looking for discerning aesthetics. So that's a really key distinction there, especially if you start out. Most everyone shooting real or architecture today probably started out shooting real estate first. Mm-hmm. Real estate is more just get all the information in so I can tell them everything about this property. Real estate agents, to a large degree, don't think of it in the same way that a publication or a designer would. Mm-hmm. They think more so in the complete showing everything at all times so you can sell more of the features, rather than limiting and restraining it down to just the most beautiful, high-impact things. Yeah. I personally think that real estate agents would do better if they moved the needle closer to how a designer and a publication would shoot. Yeah. But real estate agents are an interesting bag.
Well, it's an interesting point that I hadn't thought of, that like all the images on real estate sites, it's all wide angle,
very
as much
wide
information in one picture as you can get. And that's misleading at best, because it's you get in there and you expect a space to be a space.
Even more so misleading are the highly curated images that publications and architects do, because I can make those things look far better than the actual space. So there is a bit of honesty. There's a little bit more so honesty in a bad photograph than a good photograph.
That makes sense.
Because the good photograph, in my opinion, usually pushes it to that really, really narrow window of, if you're right here and this thing's here and you turn it there and put the light here, it's amazing. You take all that away and it's just meh. Yeah. In which I can look that way, my wife can look that way, you can look that way. But then if we take someone with a ton of talent, all of a sudden they're selling you and I as like GQ models, you know? It all depends on how you kind of frame and light it. And there's a lot of deception in there, but you're still always working with a base level of you only get to really show what you have to show. So, yeah, but sorry.
I would say the truth from a real estate photo comes as a byproduct, whereas the intention of that other type of photography is to conceal the truth in some ways. And it's interesting that
conceal
middle ground
and
somewhere,
accentuate.
Accentuate parts of the truth and conceal it. So there's an interesting middle ground sweet spot somewhere there.
Yeah, and that's how architectural videography is a increasingly difficult animal, because with a video, you don't get to just freeze and limit visuals on there. You have to. There's going to be movement, and there's going to be a little more truth and information involved in there, which will be harder to filter. And like, oh, don't look down that dead end hallway with the exit door and the sign as you pan through with the video. You know, it's harder. So, do you think that your having studied and practiced architecture gives you more of an advantage or more marketability for yourself in the type of photography you do? To the tune of about 1,000%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just full on. If I am just a photographer coming to an architect's door to sell them on what I do, they're going to look at. You have to understand how difficult a architect's day-to-day life is, and how difficult mine is. Once I'm established and running, is far easier on the day-to-day than an architect's existence. And there's an inequality in that if you don't have something to relate on, there's some percentage of dismissal that happens when a photographer shows up on your door. Hey, I'm just out here taking pretty pictures, having a good time. And a photographer will always have a pet car that, I don't know why it is, but they'll have like some kind of weird, unique Range Rover, or like some little weird van like I've had, or like a Jaguar or a little sports car. And you show up like looking snazzy and free in your car, and you sell and pay me a lot, you know. And there's like a dismissal that happens when you're coming there asking for all that money to do something that on the surface seems a lot easier than what an architect has to go through. So you have to be able to speak to that, But the reality of it is that in those days where you are shooting, I would say the tax of a day of real architectural shooting is probably on par, in my opinion, on when I would work a normal 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. Mm-hmm. I would say you pack about 3 days of intensity into 1 day of shooting easily. And that's because as soon as you arrive, it is dance monkey boy the whole time. And if you don't achieve in that small window of time the full extent of the job that you need to do, you've just wasted a huge amount of time of your clients, which is money. You've wasted a ton of money from your client. You've wasted the only access that they probably have to that project. They had one chance. They can't go back and ask the client again to let another photographer in and evict them from their home. So you have all that stuff hanging over your head and your own reputation. So if you mess up once, the result is not just that money in that day. The result is the reputation and all the other jobs you might get that through the tight-knit community, word spreads. Like, yeah, we hired Trent, but he messed this up. You know, that is not good. So if you ever mess anything up or miss something, it's free. You go back and you take care of it immediately.
Yeah.
There's no charge. There's no, it's just how it is.
Yeah.
So, but yes, background, huge. Like
Absolutely.
Everyone that asks me, I'd like to do what you do. What's the best thing to do? Go to architecture school.
Yeah.
And maybe practice as an architect for a while. You might like it and stay as an architect, or set yourself 3 to 4 years of practicing and then go into that, or go straight into that, whatever you want.
Have you ever hired interns before?
No. I'm getting to that point. There's an interesting trajectory to a creative career that at the beginning you can't charge that much because you're not dependable. You haven't figured out how to do what you do really. Sometimes you might have great success and be very creative and very good at what you're doing at that moment, but it takes thousands of those moments showing that you can do it consistently to where you can start to charge that amount. When you get to that point where you can charge a good amount, you're not actually being creative anymore. You're actually working through a process of the experiences that you've had that tell you the decisions that you need to make.
Yeah.
So you're not actually being fed creatively. You're being paid financially for achieving an end goal that you know how to do as a technician now.
Yeah.
Now, you're highly tuned to this very specific thing, and you are still working creatively, solving problems that you haven't faced before, but you've done it so much, the act of it is more on the side of a technician than the side of I'm being creative today. Mm-hmm. So as you start to get there, you realize I'm at the, to a large degree at full potential of what I can do creatively here. And at that point, you start to have to transition towards sharing what you've learned with those who don't know yet, who want to do what you're doing, as a means of finding inspiration from the process that they're going through that you're helping them with, to actually take what you do and elevate it from that point. I think you reach a plateau where if you still focus on only yourself, you stay on that plateau.
Yeah.
But I think when you reach that plateau, you have to start to shine the light backwards a little bit. And pull other people into that as well.
Yep.
So I'm not looking at hiring interns right now as much as someone to be paid who can show that they do what I do to a degree, and then kind of work them into what I do over time. And I got a guy that I'm kind of talking to about that, but I'm kind of at the end of the season and working through just creative burnout at the end of the year, like I always do. So it's a weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I just finished final reviews and burnout of just the second it's over, and then I just feel like I'm not doing enough.
Oh yeah, isn't that a weird thing? You can burn out and then like 2 days into taking it easier, like I'm gonna go insane unless I start working on something.
Take it back a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard. It's weird.
Are there, you mentioned Mr. Reinhold, are there other architectural photographers that inspire you?
There's three that I can think of off the top of my head. Mike Kelly, I really only know by name. I can't visualize anything he's done, but I know he's very proactive in just his online presence, his social media, and developing kind of these. I think, does he do the Architectural Photography Almanac, APA? I'm not sure. His name is just out there because he's been very proactive about being in the conversation nationally, I believe. And he did some really cool stuff. I think it was him with planes taking off and then photoshopped them all together, and it's just like all these planes taking off at once.
I think I know the picture, yeah.
Yeah, he does cool stuff, and is very proactive about it, marketing, pushing it out there. Lance Gerber, he's a architectural photographer out of Palm Springs area. Really serene, silent, clean work, and he does a lot of art installations as well. Really, really nice aesthetic to his stuff. And then I don't even know the name of the guy, but the really classic black and white LA hilltop home going out at night, and it's like you see the Los Angeles basin out there, and it's this black and white photograph of this house like cantilevering out over a ravine and then below.
It sounds familiar.
And there's like and there's like a woman sitting on the edge. I think of like a Eames or a Mies van der Rohe piece of furniture. There's something, it looks like a whole Eames, Mies, mid-century modern. And I forget his name, but, that's just one of those images that was always stuck in my head, that photographer, any of his stuff. I'm always kind of like, ooh. But, I mean, then beyond photographers, a lot of it is more so designers that inspire me. Any of the, more minimalist designers or anything else. It's just what appeals to me.
Yeah.
And a lot of times for me, their stuff is just so easy to shoot. But I think a lot of that is just because I gravitate towards the feeling of it. Yeah. And so it just translates easier.
Yep.
So,
I think I have two more. I would say, what from architecture school, like what formal education from architecture school do you think is helping your career the most now?
Specifically from architecture school.
Be it understanding space or connections between architectural elements, stuff like that?
I would say understanding just the difficulty of getting anything built.
Yeah.
Having that sympathy for one to pass that on. There's something about a relationship that you develop with clients where there's that sympathy of understanding how hard this probably was to get built, and hence how amazing it is. And then you kind of embody that, and you apply your full emotional, mental presence to really, you have this, you're sharpening the tip of their spear to get the next job, with photography.
I like that analogy. That's a good point. And you're creating the representation of their work, and
that's mostly all they have, because they can't take
There's a lot of embodied
clients.
Energy behind what you're presenting, and
Right.
that's a very interesting perspective to look at that.
Yeah, so it's rare, especially for residential architects, to be able to say, yeah, I'll just keep bringing potential clients by your home, and we can walk through your bathroom and your kitchen. You can't pull that too much. You got to be really close to clients to actually pull that off. And then if you do it too much, they're going to get sick of it. It's a real obtrusive thing to go and do a photo shoot of someone's house, and that's not lost on me. But yeah, understanding that and putting that emotional presence in there to do the absolute best you can is one of the major things I learned from architecture school and my practice through practicing as an architect for 3 years. I wasn't licensed, not trying to say I'm an architect. Then the understanding of just how things go together and being able to see the things that, like, oh, wow, you did that there. Oh, I get it. All right, we got to get a detail of that and show that off.
Yeah, that makes
to
sense.
stay up on what's happening and to know from a construction side the difficulty of things and the execution, and like just being able to spot things that are in the know are a big deal when you're actually capturing stuff. And if you're taking what's the highest marker of success that, okay, you'll make it as a architectural photographer, I think it has less to do with natural talent and far more to do with discipline and stick-to-itiveness and drive.
Which is something I've learned is at the core of architecture too. The first thing they tell you on day one, I don't care how well you draw, you can draw. And
Yep.
it's all about, there's not really a better term for it, stick-to-itiveness. It's about your desire to be a part of that industry. And that's something that I've really started to understand in architecture is it's all about how much you want it.
Right. Yeah. And especially then with architectural photography, no one's going to give it to you or make it for you. You have to go out there and carve that out for yourself. And unless you can face that and gird yourself up enough to do that grind, it just won't happen.
Yeah.
You could be insanely talented. No one's hiring architectural photographers to pay them hardly at all.
Yeah.
Like, I'm potentially maybe thinking about hiring someone, but there's no job postings out there for this.
Yeah.
You have to make your own business potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, most likely. And so a lot of what I learned just from my parents and through the culture that I grew up in was very conservative in its get up, make your bed, clean your room, get your to-do list, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not naturally that way at all.
Mm-hmm.
But being raised in that really gave me the advantage to say, here's my natural talent, but here's the stuff that I hate doing that I know I need to do, that I have to take this and apply it to my talent, and then I'll be deadly.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there's so many more people that are so much more talented than me that are now working at 7-Eleven or somewhere else because they didn't have the training to grind, to do that thing that you have to do to become successful. Not just the talent. It's a real thing. Like, I would spend full days just endlessly cold calling people, offering my services for free, with everyone saying, well, yeah, thanks for calling. We'll let you know. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's, however many 100 rejections of, yeah, great, it's free. No, thanks. It's a lot. It's the kind of thing where you look back on it, and I think now, like, I don't know if I could do that again. That was so incredibly hard. To know what you're getting into makes me, like, shy away from it. But ignorance was, in many ways, the best thing I had going for me.
Yeah.
Because I look back now and I'm like, what on earth was I thinking? But it worked out, so, yeah.
Well, you've given me a lot of advice already, but is there any other advice you have specifically for people that are still in school or graduates that are kind of have inklings towards photography and associated with architecture?
So no matter what, if you go working into an office, right, not to undercut the profession of architectural photography, but you'll always have the ability to say, hey, I've got a camera and like, principal, I'd love to go out there and just shoot even process photos or anything else. It's gonna be hard for you to be involved with architecture and to kind of take this hobby.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm going to earn money off of this. Like, yeah, sure you are. Like, I called my dad and told him I was going to be a photographer, and his first genuine response, and I was teasing him about this, was he laughed and said, you'll never be able to provide for a family that way. I made more money than him in the first year, and I always rub his nose in it. But it's true in that, who do you really know who's doing this? There's very, very few people. And so the advice is to just, you have to jump. It's like kind of, you have to throw away your life jackets and everything else. And you say, there's no turning back, but let's prepare ourselves really well for this journey ahead of us, Yeah. Because if you go into it thinking I'll turn around, you'll turn around.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of shied away from saying, like, yeah, start out at an architectural firm and, start shooting some stuff. A lot of people who go through photo school, I've heard, will start out working as assistants, but if they don't set like a real time limit on it, they'll get the golden handcuffs for photo assisting. And if it's a photographer they want to be, but they get too hooked on that daily income and don't make the plans to eject and try it on their own, they get lulled to sleep and just kind of, I'll just keep going on this. It's nice because I'm working in a creative atmosphere, and it's not like a every day you have to be here thing. And
you get comfortable.
Yeah, you'll get comfortable and you'll get used to things. You'll get debt, and then you'll question even more deeply, that seems like a stupid idea. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
You know? And what I did was stupid, and it's worked out really well. So, yeah, it's a hard thing to actually really give responsible advice on.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. You have to do it and treat it as a job. I mean, I didn't make any money for probably 3 or 4 years, maybe. Mm-hmm. I probably started making some amount of income to put back into the business after like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
But up to that point, it was all just input. Keep trying, you know? So, yeah, I mean, what do you have for like a 5-year kind of vision for like, what do you want your life to be, you know?
I would say my first goal, I definitely want to work in a firm. I think I would be remiss if I put all this work in and didn't actually practice the thing I'm working for.
Yep.
I've been looking at getting into some drone photography as well. It seems like marketability for a new architect would be pretty high. Drone photography is... Yep. I mean, it's a licensure process, and it's a necessary licensure process. So I've just started looking at taking classes for that, and like you said, just offering that service to whoever I'm working for, just to explore it as a hobby and hopefully see if it's more to that.
Get your license, start a business that's not on the surface associated with you. So your boss, wherever you end up working as an architect, isn't looking at you going and shooting stuff for a competing firm saying, dude. But if it's a separate business and you're not working as an architect and there's not a conflict of interest, you know, that you're not, you know, doing anything that your boss would have legal recourse to say, dude, that's not appropriate. Yeah. But, you know, keep it separate under a name that's not your own and develop that side of the business. You know, then you've got kind of a safety net as far as your employment, but then also you're dedicated and following a plan on the other thing.
Yeah.
You can build those two things together. The drone photography, it will shift towards more of a technician kind of approach if you're not careful. You have to be, like, I offer drone photography in what we do, but it's not an afterthought, but it's you can't, unless you have like a really big rig, you're not going to get a high quality camera up there. You're limited to like what the DJI drones or whatever will do. I'm not really willing to put my $10,000 or $15,000 camera on a drone that could accidentally spin out of control and honestly, you just don't need it for most drone stuff unless you're really creating this new thing with drone photography. So if I were going to take that approach, like to start, hey, let's do some drone stuff, that's good because you do need to have a license to do it. So you can say, you know, licensed, insured, and most architects are going to know that by now. A lot of them will hire like a high school student with a drone and just not care. And they'll hire them to go shoot, you know, projects in process and everything else. But if you can develop that consistency that they'll know that you'll get the good shots every time, you know, at the right light and show the right, you know, there's that. If you're fun to work with, if you're inspiring, even in your own presentation of yourself and your own ability to hold conversation and talk about things that they're interested in, those are all really important things to start to establish as being able to do when interacting with clients. So if you watch like Mad Men, ever show from a while ago, they'll have like a creative person and then they'll have people that just entertain clients. And in watching that, I was like, geez, there's people in marketing agencies that were just paid to go and take care of the client, entertain them, keep them occupied, and show them a good time. That was like their job.
Yeah.
And that it was kind of mind-blowing to me, but at the same time I realized, like, oh, when you're working with that much money and you can trim a little bit off the budget to have someone make a client happy and be pleased to be around you,
Yep.
that's a really valuable thing. And so you kind of have to incorporate that into yourself and make sure that you're presenting yourself in a way that is inspiring. I mean, I would show up to a job like this and I would imagine people would go, geez, this guy's like almost 50 and he still kind of looks like a teenager. That's odd. But if it's done with enough confidence and everything else, it's kind of like, oh, we're having fun today. You know, so that's my shtick maybe. I don't know. But that it's definitely something to keep in mind, that if you show up and you're non-communicative and you're just focused on what you're doing the whole time and there's no one else there and it's just you and the client's just kind of like, well, I guess I'll be on my phone the whole time. They hired a technician at that point that they're not building a relationship with, and your pay scale will be limited to a technician's pay scale.
Yeah.
If you're creating something that's much harder for any other technician to create, then you push more so into the realm of being paid as an artist, which there's no limit on that.
Yeah.
Your limit on that is how much they want that and feel that only you can create that thing.
Yeah.
Technician, dime a dozen.
Yeah.
As long as you can be trained, you can be a technician, and as long as you do it properly. But we're working in a subjective matter, which means, and this is another interesting thing that I was thinking about recently, is that to work in the way that I do, I have to be able to look at something and I have to extend an opinion on it. I can't look necessarily backwards and say, all right, the 3/8 wrench is going to put this bolt on that, and then, okay, apply it, done.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. You have to stand there and observe the thing, and you have to project an idea of how this could be best. And then you kind of have to share that, in a sense, with the client, as in, I'm going to form an opinion on what you did and how it's best to do this. And it's an opinion. There's no correct answer, right? Because this is a subjective realm that we're working in. It's not a mechanical, it's not a technical thing. There's technical parts of it, but you're not working towards this rod has to fit through that and be clean. That's it. If it's that kind of thing, you're limited, and there's a right and a wrong answer. With it working subjectively, like photography is, there is no right or wrong answer. It's the feel of it. And so you kind of have to think into feelings, and you have to kind of feel it and then think it, be able to communicate it, and then be able to have enough confidence to extend your opinion. And you have to be able to accept that other people might not agree with you, and especially when you start out, your opinion's going to be worthless. And so you'll extend an opinion, but they're not going to have that high of an opinion of you because you don't have any reputation. So they might critique your opinion at that point. And you have to be able to, without any offense, argue why your opinion might be something to consider. And it's always my policy. I share my opinion twice. Like, I'll share my opinion if they come back and say, well, I think it's this because of that. It's like, well, yeah, that's a point. But if and then and why and that. And if they still come back and like, yeah, but I think, I don't go 3 times. I go twice. And then if it's still their opinion that's winning out, they're paying the bill. You know, I'm not an artist in this sense. I'm a commercial artist mostly that's solving a presentation problem for them. So you have to build up your ability to form an opinion. You have to form enough emotional thickness to your skin to be able to accept critique on that opinion, and enough congenial ability to go back and forth on that without getting the offense. And you also have to be able to articulate why that opinion is there. Because at first, it's going to be more so of, this just feels right.
Yeah.
And you can still do that because there's not always an ability to articulate it that clearly. A lot of times we'll be shooting furniture in here and it's, quite a few of us standing around going like, it just doesn't feel right. Move it a bit, change it, it's like, it feels a little better right here, but this, okay. And then you... And so working subjectively is a lot of nuance and finicky picking at things and little adjustments. And you have to be able to have that conversation. And the more you can articulate why you're feeling something, the more effective you'll be at educating them as to why what you think is good is actually good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then I'm just kind of running off the rails all over the place here. So go ahead and interject.
Well, you make me think of the current debates online about AI photography.
And that's a really interesting one.
Well, and that, like your example of a technician, someone who can create AI technology, they're a technician. They may understand art, they may explain art very well, but ultimately there's no heart, there's no soul in what that AI produces, and that's that human touch that I believe will always overcome AI art. Is that there's
some of that AI art is so like, oh my goodness,
but
like,
it'll become so common that people will start to recognize.
Do you think it'll be able to like, oh, that's AI art?
I think so. There's got to be a human element that helps art survive. I mean, it always has been there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been mass production of textiles and art as long as art has been around.
Now, what is art? And what does it serve?
So I don't have an answer to that. That art is purely up to this perspective, because I could listen to an argument that AI art is art as well, because the effort of teaching AI art is an art in itself as well. So I really don't. I can only define art for myself, because I can only define what speaks to me.
Right.
So, and it's got to have that human touch to me. And then that brings it right back to the human touch could be the programming. I've started doing parametric art with
What's that?
With using Rhino drafting. It's like AutoCAD. AutoCAD has a lot of parametrics, but it's
what are parametrics?
Parametrics is a programming, so it's
Okay.
creating a language, and Rhino has a add-on called Grasshopper, and you can program processes into Grasshopper, and it will affect your drafting in Rhino. So I started, I use it a lot for doing laser cut files. You can do a program in Grasshopper that will arrange your parts onto a sheet for a laser cut file.
So you got all these individual parts, and you got a 4x8 sheet, and it's like,
Exactly.
how do you best fit them all right in
Yep,
there?
and you just select all the parts you want to put in, and you can tell it how much you want to rotate it. If you want to maintain the grain on your material, you can not allow it to rotate, so I've started doing parametric art. I did an assignment for Robert Rainey at UMA in one of his classes, and it was for hidden disabilities. So I used that information and that idea to create like a book cover through parametrics, in that all I did after the process was complete, all I did was input an outline and 4 shapes, and it randomized placement and orientation and numbers, and it basically outputted the art piece for me. So, I mean, someone could argue that that's not art, but it's got 20 hours worth of work behind it of creative design. So, that's really my answer behind what is art. Is it's really subjective to the beholder and the creator.
It is subjective. I'll agree with you there, and I'm not saying I'm right. I have to speak from my emotional position on art and try and articulate it as best I can, so it can be argued, right? So, art to me is a objectification of experience. Okay. So art can only happen from subjective perception that then requires objectification of that experience into something of further objective utility. Okay, so artist sees a beautiful sunset. Dude, that's amazing. I'm going to go try and paint that. So they took the experience, and then they go and they turn it into something a little more objectified. Maybe it doesn't one-to-one represent a sunset. Maybe it's an amalgamation of colors that took inspiration from that. And in viewing that, you can feel the same thing that they felt in a way. So they took an experience and they objectified it a little bit into a physical thing, a piece of art that then communicates the experience.
Yeah.
So AI art. AI, when it creates the art that it's creating, is pulling from a wide experience of every single artist basically that's ever lived that at least has something on the internets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and has a human to some degree saying, I want art that pulls from this experience, that experience, and that. To me, AI art is it's farther from the source, but more interlaced with complexities from all of these different areas of perception. The AI itself does not perceive, in my opinion. We fed it our perceptions into photographs and everything else, and words and likes and dislikes and all of that.
Because it's not deciding a meaning. We're telling the meaning. We're telling why this piece of work works.
Right.
So that does, yeah.
So
Yep.
were it not for us, AI would not exist. It cannot produce art unless we give it that ability to create art. So in a sense, we've programmed out of our experience into a black box something that can take everything that we've ever done, process it in some way, and
Yep.
export out this work of art. Now, it's not a unique thing from a human, but it is still pulling from human experience into creating something that a human has asked it to create. And there's also this discussion of like, well, is that pirating from artists? I personally don't think so. You can say, draw me a post-apocalyptic subway scene in the style of Wes Anderson, right? And it'll just boom, and it's amazing. Now, AI, come up with something and make it look as amazing as Wes Anderson stuff without looking anything like Wes Anderson or anything else you've ever seen. Can it do that? Maybe, but who's gonna? Can we train art? Can we train AI to judge art? Right?
Yeah.
On its own merits, not what we've decided we like as art, but what does AI like as art? Does AI get to the point where it has preferences like that? There's an interesting thing that as a human, you're kind of composed of first emotion, and then on top of that emotion, you build the ability to think through words and articulate thought. You only get words and articulate thought through interacting, being programmed by other humans. If we had you born and left you over there in that corner and just fed you, but no sounds and people, whatever, you're not going to be speaking anything. You're going to be a dog, essentially, at that point, a very unhappy dog. So we took the thing that we programmed from human to human and we put it into a machine, and we programmed that machine, and it only has one side of the human experience, that articulate thought and that ability to use logic, words, rationality, all of that.
Yep.
The thing it doesn't have is that emotional experience to pull from. But hold on, it's artificial. We made it think artificially. We call it artificial because we feel like it doesn't have the emotional experience to pull from, and we made it so it's not real, it's artificial. I still don't quite get why we call it artificial, because it's real. But the thing we don't understand is actually that programming, we programmed into it an emotional experience, which is our emotional experience that we feed into all of the sensory inputs, opinions, likes and dislikes of everything that goes on the internet. The internet is AI's emotional side.
Yeah.
And that's where it pulls all that from. So you're asking it to build art. We build art from our emotional experience, right?
Yeah.
When you ask AI to build art, it references our experiences that it sees through its programming that we've interjected, put into it, and then it generates art from that. How's that any different than a human?
And it's not. I would say it's similar to the argument, and not that there's a strong argument, but the difference between drafting by hand and drafting digitally. I can
Right.
draft digitally substantially faster than I can do so by hand. Is my art any less valid because of my medium? And
I'd never put your digital stuff on the wall, but like a hand-drawn drafting thing, when you see those, you're like,
Yeah.
we might need to frame that, you know? Because you see the little overruns, you see the little marks, you feel the experience in it.
Yeah.
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 That's interesting, yeah.
No, and anyone that calls that plagiarism AI art, you know what? I use a lot of precedents in all of my work, and that's just a more efficient way to use precedent for artwork. So, yeah, I don't really have a solid opinion on whether AI art is valid or not, but I mean, it's still human creation, so there's still
I definitely don't think
unavoidable
it's...
human input and influence. In
Yeah.
it, so,
I certainly don't think there's an argument to be made that it's plagiarism,
yeah.
because you cannot put art out and tell people to not be inspired by it and go create their own
Absolutely.
art.
Yeah.
That's just absurd. And everyone knows that this representation is of Wes Anderson or of whoever else you want to pick that was the inspiration for this. So unless it's an exact copy, it's not plagiarism, I don't think. I mean, I have people that I look at their architectural photography that started after me that I look at and I was like, that looks like my work. And like the first thing I think is some kind of selfish offense. Like, oh, if they're doing that, people are going to pay them and not me. But then I realized, like, if it even is that they saw my work and tried to emulate it, first of all, that's a compliment. Second of all, it might not be that anyone notices anything I did and was inspired by it. It's kind of an arrogant thought at the same time. And I just, yeah, it's absolutely art, and it's art in the same way that art created by humans is art, but it's in the realm of artificial intelligence, which we created.
Yeah.
So this is a creation by our creation. It's an amazing human achievement, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember just being shocked seeing some of it start to
yeah.
come out. That's just the amount of work that goes into that initial training of a program. Parametrics is about as far into programming as I will ever get, because
Right.
it's such a, even parametrics in that context in drafting, it's, if you make one mistake at the beginning, you're backtracking. And just the amount of work and labor that goes into something like creating an AI to create other things.
Word, I can't imagine. How could you
my
get a
brain just
computer
doesn't even wrap
program
around it.
to here's the feeling of Wes Anderson in programming language?
Yeah.
And now let's just create a totally new thing that looks like Wes Anderson? That's crazy to think
And
that
these-
we are able to even think that.
I mean, just if you break it down, even no matter what, it's just a collection of arbitrary shapes individually that mean nothing. And I just
Shapes and colors and
the
ones and
colors
zeros.
and shades and hues and how do you teach? Like, how do you teach color theory to a computer? How do you
Right.
teach a computer that this color is going to give me this emotion, but it's going to give me this emotion much
Right.
stronger when it's next to this color? Just
Right,
the
right.
the multitude of different assets that go into it that we don't even think about when we create, when we draw or color, or like, it just, we do what feels right, but we don't really define that feeling of why and how and what every time. So
Right.
yeah, just the labor of love that must have gone into that first person trying to train a computer.
Okay, yeah. That's where the first person thing comes from in that. So, like in a work of art, like a real work of art from a human, we won't even call it a real work of art, but from a work of art from a human, their experience, like the internet is AI's experience. Our experience that we pull from is reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we program that into the internet. But the thing within the human's piece of art is that it's a direct translation of their real first experience, the commonality of us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a human, and a human made this. What was this human feeling and experiencing and connecting dots to be able to make this, compared to an AI is not first person having an experience that they're pulling from. They're referencing several levels of experience, then being translated, then being. So it's like maybe it's like speaking to meaning through a translator rather than having a conversation with a complex individual that you can't quite understand, but through the entirety of the experience, you walk away with enlightenment,
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see the limits of that get pushed and to see how much they can train a computer to experience on their own, and what changes that would make to the output, because there's a lot of human influence, and you can see it in AI art that comes out, but when the human influence is reduced, it'll be interesting to see how that computer evolves and it's in the art that it produces. So it's
like, I wonder what true AI art would be like. You just left one night and you got back the next morning, the computer was like, hey, I wanted to make some art. This is what I made. What do you think?
I don't know. I've never seen a movie where it turned out good. So
right. Well, occasionally I get like photos that have this weird computer glitch something in them, and I'm like, that's AI art right there. That's like that'll be really interesting to see where it goes. I really want to get a philosophy of art professor in here to talk about AI art and the meaning and contradictions or weirdness of it. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to get someone who's really in the thick of it with these kinds of things and thinking on these lines to see what their thoughts on it are. But, yeah, that'd be cool. So what else you got?
I asked all the questions I wrote down. This has been incredibly informative.
Here's another question for you, though, just so I can rant on and on, I guess. How, being who you are at the age you are in the current political climate and national climate, everything else, what's the future look like for you from your age, from your perspective?
Well, I stopped working right when COVID started. Stopped working full time right when COVID started, and I think just the work climate, the connection between employer and employee has shifted a lot in the past few years. I think the people, more companies unionizing, more people kind of recognizing their power over themselves and over their own marketability. It's hard to picture myself going back to working the way I did and just being okay with the kind of abuse that comes from an employer.
Right.
And it's not a black and white. I'm not against working. I'm so board now that I'm not working, now that I'm in between classes.
No, you have to have some purpose.
I don't truly think that anyone wants to not work. People want to feel valuable. And that's probably going to be the biggest struggle for me entering the workforce, is
valuable and fulfilled.
Feeling like what I'm doing matters,
right?
And that there's important things that I need in return. And that's always going to be fiscal and financial. And so it's just going to be a hard transition for me going back to making money for someone else again. And that's probably one of my biggest fears when I graduate, or when I really take on other responsibilities, is, I want to work. I want to give something valuable to someone. I just want to know that it's appreciated.
How are employers changing, in your opinion, to allow people to feel that they're more so contributing and doing something of value, do you think?
I think allowing people to work from home, allowing people to build their own schedules, prioritizing the output in a way over the helicopter process, like the nitpicky things. I think that's promoting good change. I think that's becoming, if not common, more common than it already is, that they're starting to acknowledge that when you do the work for me doesn't matter. I need the work, and I need it by now. You doing it between 8 and 5 is irrelevant. Right. I just need you to give it to me 3 days from now. So, I think
the quality and the insistence on quality is still there, but the control of you and how you do it is
Exactly.
backed off. So you got some autonomy here.
Yes.
We trust you.
Yeah.
Wake up at 4 and do it in your underwear. We don't care. As long as the quality's there, have at it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm looking for and hoping for when I re-enter
4 a.m. in
working.
your underwear?
Exactly. Precisely and exclusively.
Right.
No, just the freedom to output, tell me what you want and when you need it. And I'll get it to you when you want, and I'll get it to you the best of my ability. But me doing it 9 to 5 and taking lunch at noon, and it just doesn't, there's a lot more for everyone to get from everyone else if we're just a little bit more accommodating of how we all work best. And that there's more for you from me if I can work in my comfort zone, and there's more from me from you if you can respect that.
No, that's a great point. I wonder what the negatives of going that direction will be, because there's no improvement without some negatives.
Yeah.
There simply is not. It's a law of nature. Now, if the negative is that the end result is slightly off of the quality where it could be, but that then by accepting that, the accommodation of that is that you have to charge a little bit more and maybe work on it a little bit longer as a company. But the payback for the company is that you have very content and happy employees. You might lose a tiny bit here, but gain so much here that this can be compensated, and that's fine. I know for sure there are like so many people that have to do 9 to 5 end up wasting so much time.
No, it's
So much time.
just my wife works from home, and her time for work is just so much more valuable because she also has time for herself. So
Right.
she has time to do laundry throughout the day if she wants to on her lunch or on her break. She can just do that, and that
Right.
makes the time that she's focused on working much more valuable because she's not thinking about the other things she has to do at 5 o'clock when she gets home. She's able to pick at those things throughout the day, and that makes her feel a lot more accomplished, and she's making real progress. And that's, I don't see, there's obviously negatives to everybody working their own schedule. It's, the milestone marker of the every day at 5, we've got some completion. So I definitely understand that.
Right.
But I think that just shifting your expectations and shifting the way we perceive hard work would help a lot in that, and combating the negatives of that.
Especially in more intellectual fields like design. Obviously, I can't photograph a building in my underwear from home. I can do the post-production, I can do the invoicing, I can do my marketing, I can do social media, whatever. That kind of thing you can do, but like actual production of something where you need to be, although I could FaceTime in from bed, and but yeah, that I certainly for my personality, much more in tune with this generation, but at the same time, if I'm in a setting where I feel I'm similar to too many people, I feel very awkward. Mm-hmm. I have a high degree of wanting to be an individual and special, which I'm sure most people feel that, I'd imagine. I feel it probably more so than a lot of people. And it pushes me in some ways that are good, and it probably makes me disengage from a lot of situations and things that might be beneficial to me but feel too cohesive for there to be anything novel in it. The novel for me holds a huge amount of value. It's kind of in newness of experience. There's a lot of potential that I like to interact with. So anytime, organized group religious ceremonies to me are very. So you all believe this the same, and you sit and prove this. No, okay, all right. Those kind of things to me are very, not off-putting, but just they feel tight and claustrophobic, and I just want to pull the eject lever and so. Anyways,
Makes me think of some old Futurama jokes of free me of free thought.
I've heard people say that. That's yeah. All right. Well, anything else you think?
I don't think so.
Any
I
questions
really
you think
appreciate
your
your time.
classmates or anything else would?
No, I'm really the only one interested in photography.
Cool. Well, anytime you've got like follow-up questions or anything else, feel free to reach out. We'll try and answer it. Or if you want to come back in a while and go through more questions or anything else, we'd love to have you.
Sure,
So,
absolutely.
thank you so much for coming down and going through all this. Scott McCallister, where can people find you on social media and whatnot, or are you smart enough to stay away?
I'm not. I'm not much of a social media. I'm a student at UMA, and I'm pretty easy to find there. My name and my email is the same as every other UMA student's, so, well, not my name, but my email is just my name at maine.edu, so Scott McCallister at maine.edu. This is the best way to reach me and communicate with me, but I strayed away from social media.
Don't blame you at all. I'm looking to hire someone to take it away from me completely. Never engage.
It's critically important to any business.
Yeah.
I am a middle of the road millennial, so Facebook came about prime time for me, and then Instagram was just after I stopped being interested in new social media.
Right.
So I just don't really have a presence, and I'm not disappointed by that.
No, I keep thinking how nice it used to be when I was, even in college, to be able to disappear.
Yeah.
You just don't have that now.
Yeah.
Like you could just vanish into your own corner and have peace, but that's just not there. It's so weird. But that's a generational difference that only you're on the cusp of. And like I've lived two lives, pre and post, this social media box always strapped to your hand.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't really like it. I'd rather live in the other way as far as my emotional state, but it certainly makes it easier to get ahead business-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So you lose something emotionally to gain something.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I know. It's always on the back burner to update that LinkedIn profile, and but LinkedIn is becoming the same thing as every other social media. So
Yeah.
no, I'll prioritize it someday, but for now it's email.
Yeah.
And
All
it's
right.
like you already mentioned, it's funny that this younger generation is actually going full circle and wanting to be further away from social media in some ways as well.
Is that happening a lot these days?
I feel like a lot of it's split. There's the obsession with social media that I think every generation, and it may be more, but I also see more people from that generation not really being tied to their phones like mine was.
Really?
Mine grew into cell phones, and I think a lot of the millennial generation is still really tied to them, but I see a lot, at least the millennials in school, like I don't see them a lot further from their phone than a lot of other students.
Really?
Yeah.
So like the kids in their early 20s,
Early 20s,
you'll
18,
see them
19,
without a phone.
Like the two students that are in my class that are fresh out of high school are, I think, less on their phones than the other. Like I think there's one other millennial with me, and then maybe a really young millennial. But they're the two people that are right out of high school almost never have their phones on them.
I wonder, like, if my generation has maybe the hardest time with it because we didn't really grow up in it. It was just all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
It was part of my generation's education growing up. So we were like it, and then for your generation, it was dropped on you.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't until like 2007-ish where it really started to like, oh my goodness, I can watch basketball and I can do anything. And yeah, and I don't think we perceived what we were losing and what we were gaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe the younger generations have a little bit more of the feedback to say, okay, this is maybe how you want to deal with this. Let's create a little bit of separation and
that
handle
social
it better.
Connection is coming across as a third parent for a lot of people, I think. And I imagine for their generation, growing up with parents that understand technology as it is now is probably difficult because it gives them, it's a tool to monitor you as well as all of the other features it brings.
Right.
So I can understand them distancing themselves from that,
Yeah.
especially just as they get into school. It's their first opportunity to remove themselves from their parents and their
Right.
old life. So pushing that away makes sense to me, that they just want to be more immersed in the now.
Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense, that the phone acts as a monitoring device, and as you come of age, you want more autonomy.
Yeah.
And now you start to view that phone as like a tracking device far more
Yeah.
than previous generations in a way. Like, we'll talk of it as like, it's just a track, but we can't overcome our obsession of like the dopamine hits and stuff. And I know our kids keep looking at us like, are you on Facebook again? Or are you in the bathroom looking at Instagram reels? Of course, that's all I do.
I think the tracking, we've all just accepted that if the government wants to know where we are, they already do.
Sad.
So, you know
Yeah.
what? They can track me.
Yeah. All right. This time we're officially ending it.
For sure.
So, Scott McCallister, thanks so much for coming down, and check out Scott on his email.
Scott.McCallister@maine.edu.
Cool. Thanks, Scott.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.